The cold bit through Sienna Monroe's jacket like tiny teeth. She tugged the fabric tighter around her thin frame, but the wind found every seam. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk on Eastwood Avenue, watching the bus pull away, without her. Again. That was the third one in 40 minutes. She couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. Her fingers curled inside her coat pocket, clutching the only thing she had left, a single dollar bill, soft from too many folds and the moisture of anxious palms. It was her last piece of currency. Not enough to fix her problems, but enough for one small thing, a loaf of discounted bread. Maybe. She could feel the hunger blooming in her gut like an ache. Her job interview had ended with polite rejection, again. "You're not quite what we're looking for," the manager said, even before she finished introducing herself. They hadn't even looked at her resume. Sienna was used to being invisible. She had learned how to blend into spaces, how to disappear in plain sight. It was easier that way. Less painful than having people see how low she'd sunk. As she turned to head toward the market, she spotted movement near the rusted bench across the street. At first, she thought it was a stray dog. But then she saw bare feet dangling above the concrete. A child. Sienna paused. Her instincts sharpened. The boy sat alone, motionless except for the slight trembling of his legs. His clothes were too thin for the weather, and his small hands clutched something tightly, a photograph. She didn't move right away. People passed the boy, barely glancing. No one stopped. No one asked? Just like they never asked her anything either. But something about the boy, the way he held that photo like a lifeline, made her cross the street. As she approached, he shrank slightly, pulling the scarf around his shoulders tighter, though it was fraying and useless against the cold. "Hey," she said softly, crouching to his level. "Are you lost?" He looked up, startled. His face was smudged with dirt, his lips chapped, and his eyes, wide and brown, were glassy with held-back tears. "My mommy went to the store," he said, voice shaking. "She told me to wait. But she didn't come back." Sienna glanced around. No panicked parent nearby. No one calling his name. Just cars, and wind, and indifference. The boy held up the photograph. It showed a smiling woman holding him in her lap. He must have been younger in it, but there was no mistaking his face. "She gave me this," he added, "so I'd know she's coming back." Sienna's chest tightened. "What's your name?" "Liam." "Liam, do you know your last name? Or where you live?" He shook his head. "I just remember, the bus." And then she said she needed milk. Her mind raced. A missing kid. Maybe abandoned. Maybe not. Maybe just lost. Maybe not. The what-ifs screamed through her head, but louder than all of them was a memory of herself at 6 years old, left in a grocery aisle for too long. Crying until a stranger walked her to the manager's desk. She looked down at the dollar in her hand. That single, stupid dollar. It wasn't worth more than this boy's safety. She stood and offered her hand. "Come with me, Liam. I'll help you get back to your mom." He hesitated only a second before slipping his cold fingers into hers. Sienna wrapped her scarf around his shoulders and guided him down the block to the bus stop. The next ride downtown, to the police precinct, cost exactly $1. She handed the driver her last bit of hope. "One fare," she said. "He's with me." The driver looked at the boy, then at her. There was a pause. The kind that holds judgment, but also silent understanding. He nodded. "Go ahead." They sat in the back of the bus, side by side. Liam leaned into her arm like a tired kitten. He didn't say much. Just stared down at the photo in his lap. Sienna didn't talk either. She was too busy wondering what came next. She didn't have enough food at home for herself, let alone a child. No heat. No certainty. No plan. But this was the only thing she could do that felt right. By the time they reached the station, dusk had begun to settle. The city was lighting up with yellow windows and brake lights, but the world still felt dim around her. Inside the station, Liam clung to her tightly, refusing to speak to the officers at first. They asked her for her name, but she didn't stay to give it. She wasn't trying to get credit. She just wanted to make sure he was safe. "You're a good woman," one officer said. She didn't feel like one. Not when she walked home with cold feet and an empty stomach. That night, in her apartment, she boiled water for tea but didn't drink it. She stared at the cracked ceiling. Hunger curled in her belly like a pet she didn't ask for. But something inside her, something small but stubborn, felt lighter. She had $1 this morning. Now she had nothing. And yet, somehow, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel empty. The next morning, the hunger in Sienna's belly had grown into something deeper, not just physical emptiness, but a hollow ache of uncertainty. She wrapped herself in a blanket and sat by the frosted window, legs curled under her like a child, watching the neighborhood wake up. She didn't regret giving up the $1. Not even for a second. But part of her wondered, did he find his mom? Is he okay? Was he really just lost? There had been no answers when she left the station. The officer had thanked her, said they'd take it from there, and gently ushered Liam inside while he looked back with wide, watery eyes. She'd walked away before they asked for her name. Afraid of what came next, questions, attention, maybe even judgment for how ragged she looked. Her instinct to flee was stronger than her need for closure. Now, sitting in her silent apartment, she couldn't shake the image of Liam's tiny hands holding that photo. She remembered the way he clutched it like it was life itself, the only proof he belonged to someone. She had done what she could. That was enough. Or so she told herself. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. 3 knocks. Not frantic. Not friendly. Intentional. She stood slowly, heart pounding. Her landlord usually knocked with irritation, rapid and angry. This was different. She opened the door. 2 officers stood in the hallway. A tall man with tired eyes and a younger woman with a kind but unreadable expression. Both in uniform. Both watching her closely. "Miss Monroe?" the man asked. She hesitated. "Yes?" "I'm Officer Grayson. This is Officer Lee. We need to speak with you. May we come in?" Her blood went cold. Why are they here? Did something happen to Liam? Did they think she did something wrong? She stepped aside without a word. The officers entered and looked around the small studio apartment. It was painfully clean, not because she was tidy, but because there was so little inside to clutter it. A mattress on the floor. 1 folding chair. A chipped mug on the windowsill. A pile of worn clothes in the corner. This wasn't a home. It was survival. Officer Lee turned to her gently. "We're here about the little boy you brought to the station yesterday." Sienna stiffened. "Is he okay?" Grayson nodded. "He's safe now. Thanks to you." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "But there's more," he continued. "The boy, Liam, he wasn't just lost." Lee stepped forward, pulling out a clear plastic sleeve from her coat. Inside it was the photograph. The same one Liam had carried. It looked cleaner now. Preserved. "Liam has been missing for nearly 5 weeks," she said. "He was abducted from his home across state lines. There's been a national search." Sienna blinked. "Abducted?" Grayson nodded. "A man claiming to be his uncle took him from daycare. Disappeared with him. The man was spotted at a local grocery store yesterday and was arrested, but during the confusion, Liam ran. That meant Liam had escaped. Alone. On foot. Somehow ended up blocks away from Sienna's bus stop. Alone in the cold. And if she hadn't stopped," Lee continued, her voice low and careful, "if you hadn't brought him in when you did, we don't know what would have happened." Sienna's hands trembled. She sat down slowly in the folding chair. "I just thought he was lost. She whispered. I didn't know. You did the right thing, Lee said firmly. Exactly the right thing. Grayson cleared his throat. There's something else. She looked up. Liam's family has been searching for him nonstop. His mother has been working with law enforcement and the media. There was a reward offered, $50,000, for information leading to his return. Sienna blinked. I don't want money. I just wanted him to be safe. Lee smiled softly. That's exactly why his mother insisted it be you. Sienna shook her head, overwhelmed. But I didn't do anything special. You didn't walk away, Grayson said. That's rare. There was silence between them, thick and fragile. For a moment, the sounds of the city outside faded behind the enormity of what she was hearing. $50,000. More than she had ever held in her life. Enough to erase every overdue notice. Enough to start again. And yet, in this moment, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt relieved. Because Liam was safe. Because something she did actually mattered. Lee placed a card on the table. His family would like to meet you. If you're willing. Sienna stared at the name on the card. Rachel Hartman. A mother who didn't know her child was safe until yesterday. She nodded slowly, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Yes. I'd like that. As the officers left, Grayson turned back one more time. You didn't just give away your last dollar, Miss Monroe. You gave someone back their world. Sienna stood in the doorway, the wind curling around her legs, the door frame steady beneath her hand. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel poor. She felt whole. The ride to the Hartman home felt like a dream Sienna wasn't sure she belonged in. Officer Lee had offered to drive her personally, and Sienna didn't argue. She hadn't been in a car that clean in years. The seats were warm, the windows spotless, the silence oddly comforting. As they crossed into the upscale part of the city, Sienna's eyes widened at the shift in scenery. The cracked sidewalks of Eastwood faded into neatly trimmed hedges and driveways where children left scooters lying lazily in the sun. The houses had actual front yards. Windows glowed with soft light. The streets were quiet in a way that only money could buy. They turned down a cul-de-sac, and Lee pulled into the driveway of a 2-story brick home with a deep blue door and flower boxes under every window. It looked like the kind of house Sienna used to imagine when she was a little girl watching TV in the foster home she bounced through at age 10. I'll wait in the car, Lee said, her voice warm but respectful. Sienna hesitated at the curb. Her thrifted shoes suddenly felt louder on the concrete than they should have. She adjusted her coat, still worn and patched at the elbows, and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately. A woman with auburn hair and eyes just like Liam stood there, her hands clasped as if in prayer, her expression already trembling. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, or weeks. Behind her, the house glowed with the hum of soft music and family photographs on every wall. Sienna, she said. Mrs. Hartman? Sienna asked softly. The woman stepped forward and pulled her into a hug before she could finish. Please, Rachel, she whispered. Her voice cracked. Thank you? Thank you for not walking away from my son. Sienna was frozen for a second, unsure what to do. But then she slowly returned the embrace. Rachel pulled back, wiping her tears. He hasn't stopped talking about you. Do you want to see him? Sienna could only nod. She followed Rachel into the living room, where sunlight poured through the wide windows. And there, sitting cross-legged on a plush rug, building something with blocks, was Liam. He turned when he saw her. His eyes lit up. You came! He ran to her, barefoot this time by choice, and threw his arms around her legs. Sienna knelt, smiling through tears. Of course I did. I drew you something, he said eagerly, running to the coffee table. He picked up a crayon sketch of two people, one tall, one small, standing side by side under a sun and a tree. It was childish and imperfect, and it meant the world. "That's me," he said, pointing. "And that's you? I told Mommy you're a hero." Sienna blinked hard. "You're the brave one, Liam." Rachel watched from the kitchen, wiping her eyes with a dish towel. "I don't know what I would have done," she said after a pause, "if you hadn't found him when you did." "I didn't do anything special," Sienna said softly. "I just saw a child who needed help." Rachel shook her head. "You did more than help. You changed everything." Sienna glanced around the room. There was a warmth here, not just from the fireplace or the furniture, but from something deeper. The walls held memories. The air felt loved. "I didn't expect anything from this," Sienna said, her voice low. "I didn't even give them my name." Rachel stepped forward. "That's exactly why you deserve everything that's coming." She handed Sienna an envelope. Sienna didn't open it, just stared at it like it might disappear. "There's a check inside," Rachel continued. "From the reward fund. It's yours. No conditions. No expectations. I know you didn't do it for money, but I want you to have a fresh start." Sienna felt something crack open in her chest. She wanted to refuse, to be humble. But this wasn't pity. This was gratitude. Real, raw, unconditional gratitude. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about being seen. "I'll use it well," she said finally. "I promise." Rachel smiled. "That's all I wanted to hear." That afternoon, they shared tea in the kitchen while Liam colored at the table. They talked about books, work, life before motherhood, and struggle. Sienna learned that Rachel had been a high school counselor before her son was taken. That she'd quit everything to search for him. That every photo in the house was dusted weekly, just in case Liam came home and noticed if one had moved. Before she left, Liam tugged at her sleeve and handed her the drawing again. "Take it," he said. "So you remember me." She smiled. "I could never forget you." As she stepped out into the cold again, envelope tucked in her coat and the drawing pressed to her chest, something felt different in her lungs, like she could finally breathe fully for the first time in years. She had walked into the police station with nothing but a child's hand in hers. She walked away with something no money could ever measure. The bus ride back to Eastwood felt like traveling between two different worlds. Sienna stared out the window, Rachel's envelope resting heavily in her lap. She hadn't opened it, not yet. She was afraid to. Not out of doubt, but out of disbelief. The idea that someone like her could hold the means to restart a life, it didn't feel real. Outside, the trees blurred past. Inside, her mind spun with possibilities she'd never allowed herself to entertain before. A new coat. A warm meal. A clean bed. A place that felt like home. She hadn't thought that far ahead in years. The driver called her stop and she rose, stepping back onto the cracked pavement of her old neighborhood. She passed the shuttered corner store where she used to beg the clerk to let her slide till Friday. The burnout lamp post. The cold shadows of buildings that had never known sunlight. And then, her door. She climbed the narrow stairwell, her hands tightening around the envelope like it might slip away if she let it go for even a second. Inside her apartment, the silence was different this time. It wasn't the emptiness of loneliness. It was the quiet before something begins. She sat at the table, the same place the officers had spoken to her just a day earlier, and finally opened the envelope. Her breath caught. $50,000. The check was real. Signed. Legitimate. For a long moment, all she could do was stare. Then she laughed, a short, startled sound, and cried. Not just tears of joy, but of exhaustion. Of finally being allowed to hope. The next day, Sienna cashed the check at the bank down the street. They verified everything 3 times, politely but skeptically. When the funds cleared, they looked at her with new eyes, eyes that saw someone different than before. With trembling hands, she opened a savings account. "I'd like to set up automatic rent payments," she told the banker, who blinked in surprise. And just like that, the tide began to turn. By the end of the week, she'd moved out of the apartment she once called a box with plumbing. Her new place was still modest, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and mismatched cabinets, but it had sunlight, a lock that worked, a stove that didn't hiss with every use. There was even a little balcony with enough room for a chair and a plant. She bought a bed. A real one. With a frame. Her first night there, she lay down on clean sheets, clutching Liam's crayon drawing like a sacred object. The ceiling above her didn't leak, and for once, the silence wasn't a warning. It was peace. But Sienna didn't stop there. She spent days researching how to finish her GED, something she never thought she'd return to. She applied for it quietly, not telling anyone but herself. Then, she bought a used laptop. She taught herself how to write a resume that didn't apologize for her gaps, but reframed them as resilience. She applied to part-time jobs in youth services, community centers, even nonprofit shelters. Places where kids like Liam, and like her, wouldn't get ignored. She even walked back into the same cafe that rejected her, resume in hand again, but this time, not out of desperation. Out of choice. She got hired 2 weeks later. The manager didn't even recognize her. "You have something different in your eyes," he said. She smiled. "That's called rest." One morning, while sipping coffee on her balcony, Sienna opened her email and found a message from Rachel. Subject: a thought. "Hi Sienna. I hope this isn't too forward, but I've been thinking about your story. Your instinct to help Liam, your heart. I think you'd be an incredible advocate. I used to work in youth services, and they're hiring at a child advocacy nonprofit I still have contacts at. If you're open to it, I'd be honored to refer you. Let me know. Either way, we're cheering you on, always. With gratitude. Rachel." Sienna read it 3 times. Her heart thudded. The idea of standing beside children who had no one, kids like she'd once been, didn't feel like a fantasy anymore. It felt like a calling. She replied with just one word. Yes. Weeks passed, and her new life unfolded slowly but surely. She still rode the bus. Still lived with discipline. Still clipped coupons. But the fear was gone. Replaced by something solid and growing. Liam's drawing now sat framed above her desk. Beneath it, a sticky note. Remember why. She hadn't changed overnight. But she had chosen not to disappear. And for the first time, the world had chosen to see her back. The office was modest, tucked inside a converted brick building with a leaky radiator and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly like bees. But to Sienna, it felt like a cathedral. She stepped into the Child Advocacy Center on her first day with her shoulders squared, her resume freshly printed, and her hope cautiously held in both hands. A soft blue lanyard with her name on it hung around her neck. Sienna Monroe, Intake Coordinator Trainee. The role was part-time, entry-level, and temporary, but it was hers. And it mattered. Hey! You must be the one Rachel mentioned, said a woman with curly gray hair and warm eyes. I'm Marcy. I've been here 23 years. You ready to jump in? Sienna smiled. I've been ready for a while. She was assigned a cubicle near the front, next to a laminated poster of emergency numbers and hand-drawn butterflies from kids who had passed through the center. Her job was simple on paper: answer phones, help process intake forms, and greet walk-ins. But nothing was simple when the stories started arriving. On her second day, a boy no older than 8 sat in the waiting room with a blank stare and dried blood on his sleeve. His mother didn't come with him. Just a school counselor, and a silence so thick it felt alive. Sienna brought him a juice box and sat 2 chairs away, saying nothing. He didn't speak. But he reached for her hand and held it for a moment without looking. She thought of Liam. She thought of herself. And she didn't flinch. By the end of the week, she had heard snippets of stories she couldn't unhear, bruises that were bike accidents. Homes with locks on the outside of doors, kids who wore the same hoodie for 7 days straight. It was heavy, but not hopeless. Sienna carried it like she'd carried everything in her life, quietly, but with all her strength. One afternoon, as she was scanning files into the database, Marcy passed by and placed a cup of tea on her desk. "Most people come here with good intentions," she said, settling into the chair across from her. "But you came here with history. I can see it in how you listen." Sienna looked up. "Is that a good thing?" "It is," Marcy said, "if you know how to keep your balance." The real test came the following week. A girl was brought in late on a Tuesday. Her name was Nadia. 12 years old. Thin as reeds and angry as fire. She refused to speak to anyone. Screamed when the caseworker tried to ask her questions. Refused food. Threw a cup of water at a volunteer. Marcy stepped out of the room, frustrated. "She's shutting us out. Can't get through." Sienna glanced toward the closed door. Something stirred inside her. "Let me try." "You're not trained for this yet," Marcy warned. Sienna nodded. "I know. But I understand her." Marcy hesitated. Then waved her in. Inside, Nadia sat with her back against the far wall, arms crossed, lip curled in defiance. Her eyes darted like a trapped animal's. The room was plain, just chairs, a rug, and a few posters meant to make it feel safe. It didn't work on kids like Nadia. Sienna didn't speak at first. She just sat on the floor. Not across from her. Not above her. Just near. After a long silence, she said quietly, "When I was 10, I used to pretend I was invisible. Not like a fun game. I really thought if I sat still enough, no one could see me. That way, they couldn't hit me. Or yell. Or lie." Nadia looked up. Sienna continued, eyes on the floor. "One time, I stayed under a table for 6 hours straight. Just so I wouldn't hear them fighting." Another pause. Then, from across the room, a quiet voice. "Mine hit the wall. Not me. But close enough." Sienna turned her head slowly. "That's still hitting you." Nadia didn't respond. But her shoulders dropped. A crack in the armor. They sat there for 20 more minutes. No forms. No therapy words. Just space. Just truth. When Sienna left the room, Marcy was waiting. "She's calmer," Marcy said, eyes narrowed with curiosity. "What did you say?" "Nothing," Sienna replied. "I just remembered who I used to be. That night." Sienna walked home under a bruised orange sky, thinking about Nadia, about Liam, about the children she hadn't met yet. She wasn't a savior. She wasn't perfect. But she had something she hadn't had in years. Purpose. And as she unlocked her apartment door and stepped into the warm light, she realized something else. That $1 she gave away weeks ago, it didn't just feed hope in someone else's life. It bought back her own. The email arrived on a quiet Friday morning just as Sienna finished updating Nadia's case file. She recognized the name immediately, Rachel Hartman, and her heart gave a small flutter, the kind that came with warmth and nerves in equal measure. The subject line read, "Would you consider speaking?" She clicked. "Hi Sienna. I hope you're doing well. Liam talks about you constantly. You've made a bigger impact than you probably realize. I'm writing because the nonprofit I volunteer with is hosting a community night. It's a gathering for families of missing children, some reunited, some still searching. We invite speakers every year. Survivors, parents, advocates, and sometimes people who made the choice not to walk away. Would you be willing to share your story? Just a few minutes. No pressure. But I think your voice could mean a lot. Either way, we're always in your corner. With gratitude, Rachel." Sienna reread the message 3 times. Her stomach turned. Speak. Out loud. About what happened. The thought terrified her. She was used to being behind the scenes, The quiet one who typed intake notes, brought juice boxes, and helped kids feel a little less alone. But talking about herself? Her past? Her moment of desperation and kindness colliding on a cold street? She stared at the blinking cursor, unsure. Then she remembered Liam's face when he saw her at his house. The way he wrapped his arms around her legs and whispered, "You came." Sienna replied with one word. "Yes." The event was held in the auditorium of a local community center. Folding chairs. A string of white lights across the stage. Tables lined with framed photographs of children, missing and found. There were candles and name tags, coffee urns and tissues on every table. The room buzzed with quiet emotion. Hope. Grief. Something sacred. Sienna stood backstage, fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed her blouse. Rachel greeted her with a hug, warm and steady. "You don't have to be polished," she said. "Just be honest." Sienna smiled weakly. "That I can do." A man in a wheelchair spoke first, a former detective turned advocate. Then a mother read a letter to her missing daughter. Then a teenager, rescued from trafficking, stood and told the room how she taught herself to cook in a shelter. Sienna was next. The host called her name. She walked slowly onto the stage. Heart hammering. The podium felt too tall. The microphone, too loud. For a moment, she forgot why she had said yes. But then, she saw Liam, sitting next to Rachel in the third row, clutching that same crayon drawing. Beaming. She took a breath. "My name is Sienna Monroe," she began. "And not too long ago, I had $1 to my name." There was a silence, the kind that listens. "I had nothing. No job, no food, no direction. I was standing at a bus stop, deciding whether I should buy a piece of bread or take the bus home. And that's when I saw a little boy sitting alone, holding a photograph." She paused. "He said he was waiting for his mom. He didn't know where she went. And something in me, maybe the part that remembers being that child, said I couldn't walk away." She told them about the $1, the bus ride, the long hours in the police station, the knock on the door. "I didn't know that he had escaped someone who meant him harm. I didn't know he had been missing for weeks. I didn't know there was a reward or that his mother would become someone I'd grow to admire deeply." She looked down, then back up. "All I knew was that a child needed help. And I needed, in some quiet way, to matter to someone." There were tears in the audience. Nods. Hands clutched tightly in laps. "I stand here now, not as someone who saved a life, but as someone who was saved by that moment. Because it reminded me that even the smallest act of compassion, even from someone who has almost nothing, can change everything." She stepped away from the microphone to applause, not loud, not performative, just genuine. Rachel met her at the foot of the stage, eyes glistening. "You were always more than you thought you were," she whispered. Liam hugged her legs again, just like the first time. And Sienna knew something for sure. This time, she was being seen not as a mistake or a ghost from the system, but as a light. The following Monday began like any other. A stack of intake files waited on Sienna's desk. Nadia had drawn her a cat in neon markers and taped it to her monitor with a scribbled message. "I like this place now." Sienna smiled as she sipped her coffee, letting the moment settle warmly around her. Then came a knock on the glass entrance. She looked up, and time unraveled. Standing on the other side of the door, clutching a frayed purse and an anxious expression, was Elena Monroe, Sienna's mother. Older now, thinner than she remembered, but unmistakable. That same crooked jawline. The same darting eyes that used to scan for danger or escape. Sienna froze. Her breath caught like a fishhook in her throat. She hadn't seen Elena in nearly 8 years. Not since the night she left Sienna in a stranger's apartment, promising to come back with dinner, and never did. Sienna had slept on the floor that night, waiting. By morning, She knew what had happened. Abandonment wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was as quiet as a door that never reopened. Elena stepped inside slowly, hesitating when she saw her daughter behind the desk. Sienna? Sienna stood, unsure what to do with her arms. The air in the room changed. The past swept in like a storm under the door. Why are you here? Sienna asked, voice steady but quiet. Elena swallowed. I saw your photo. Online. From the event. Rachel posted about you. Rachel. Of course. Sienna hadn't asked to be tagged. But the nonprofit had shared a photo of the speakers. Her name. Her story. And the ghosts had followed. Elena looked down. I wasn't sure you'd even talk to me. I'm not sure I will, Sienna replied. Not unkindly, but not soft either. They stood in the small lobby of the center, surrounded by laminated posters about trauma and trust. The irony was suffocating. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Elena said. For leaving. For everything. Sienna crossed her arms, her heart pounding. Why now? Elena's shoulders slumped. I got clean. 2 years. I'd been in a women's halfway house. Saw your name and I just needed you to know that I think about it every day. Silence. I didn't have anything to give you, Elena whispered. So I gave you nothing. I thought that would hurt you less. Sienna laughed, a soft, broken thing. It hurt more. Elena winced. Sienna took a breath. Let it out slowly. You want forgiveness? I want you to know I'm trying to be better. That's all. Sienna stared at her, really looked. The woman who once left her with stale cereal and empty promises now stood here trembling. Not asking for money or pity, just acknowledgement. You were my mom, Sienna said. And I needed you. I needed someone to see me. I know, Elena whispered, tears in her eyes. And now the world finally sees you. Like I should have. Sienna blinked hard. She could feel the younger version of herself, sitting in that dark apartment, waiting. Crying. Growing up too fast. But she was no longer that girl. She was the woman who had saved a child. Who now stood between other children and their own darkness. And strangely, she didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. You don't get a role in my life again, Sienna said softly. But you get to live yours. I hope you make something good of it. Elena nodded. That's fair. She turned to go. But just before she reached the door, Sienna said, Wait. Elena paused. I'm not the girl you left, Sienna said. I'm not waiting for you anymore. Elena looked back, and smiled through tears. I'm glad. And then she was gone. Sienna stood alone in the lobby, the space vibrating with the aftershock of memory. But it wasn't pain that lingered, it was peace. She had said what needed to be said. No screaming. No begging. No more hollow spaces. Just a line drawn in the sand, firm, but free. She walked back to her desk, where Nadia's drawing still fluttered from the corner. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of being left behind. She had chosen herself. It came on a rainy Thursday, tucked in a pile of flyers and bills. No return address, just her name written in neat cursive on a cream envelope. Sienna Monroe. She almost didn't open it. After everything, her reunion with Liam, the speech, the confrontation with her mother, she had started to feel like her life had found its rhythm. Quiet mornings, meaningful work, late-night journaling with tea on her balcony. It was simple. Steady, safe. But something about the envelope tugged at her. She tore it open with cautious fingers. Dear Ms. Monroe. My name is Diane Yu. I'm the director of the Carter Family Foundation, a private nonprofit organization focused on youth advocacy, educational equity, and intervention support for vulnerable children. I came across your story through Rachel Hartman's recent post, and I was moved, not only by your act of kindness but by the quiet, courageous path you've taken since. We are currently building a new initiative, a state-supported mentorship program designed to connect formerly at-risk individuals with youth navigating the foster and shelter systems. We believe that the most effective advocates are those who have lived the stories themselves. We would be honored if you would consider joining our advisory board as both a consultant and representative voice. We understand this is a significant ask. Compensation and training will be provided. But more importantly, this role would allow you to shape how hundreds of children are seen, heard, and helped. I hope you will consider stepping further into the light you've already created. Warmly, Diane Yu, Executive Director, Carter Family Foundation. Sienna let the letter fall gently onto the table. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from something more dangerous, possibility. She'd always believed her story was a footnote. A survival tale, not a blueprint. But here it was. Being asked to guide others? She stood, walking to the balcony, letting the letter rustle softly behind her. The sky was heavy with clouds, but it wasn't dark, it was silver. Like something just about to change. Could she do this? Was she ready to be more than the girl who helped a child? Was she ready to help change a system? Later that evening, she sat on her bed, Liam's drawing still in its frame. She stared at it long and hard. Not just at the little stick figures, but at what it had come to mean, that one moment of compassion could spark a chain reaction. The drawing was simple, but it told a story. And maybe, it was time for her to tell a bigger one. She pulled out a notebook and began to write, questions, ideas, fears. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was trying to get clear on what she wanted. And one sentence kept echoing back. I hope you will consider stepping further into the light you've already created. She thought about the kids she'd seen at the center, Nadia, and the boy with the bruised silence. And the girl who finally smiled after 5 visits. She thought about herself. About what it would have meant to have someone like her walk into the room when she was a child. Not to fix everything. Just to see her. She picked up her phone. Typed out a message. Subject, Advisory Board Opportunity. Message, yes. I'd like to help. She hit send. Then closed her eyes. Not to sleep, but to let the weight of the moment settle into her bones. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was building something. The conference table gleamed. Not the kind of surface you eat on, or rest your elbows against casually. It was the kind you tiptoed around, made of dark walnut, polished to an executive sheen. Around it sat people in tailored suits, lanyards that opened doors, and voices that didn't shake when they spoke. Sienna sat at the far end, a nameplate in front of her. Sienna Monroe, Youth Advisory Consultant. The letters were sharp and official, as if carved into stone. She kept her hands folded in her lap to hide the tremor. Diane Yu smiled at her from across the room. Sienna, would you be willing to share your thoughts on the intake proposal for peer mentorship? Sienna felt every eye shift toward her. Just months ago, she'd been behind a plastic desk with a cracked monitor, warming ramen on a stovetop with a broken coil. She had no college degree. No last name that opened doors. What was she doing here? Then she thought of Liam. Of Nadia. Of the girl who drew cats and taped them to desks, just to say she belonged. She unfolded her hands and raised her chin. I think we need to start by not assuming trust, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. These kids aren't waiting to be helped. They're waiting to see if someone's going to disappoint them again. The room stilled. And that means hiring mentors with real scars. Not resumes. Not degrees. But people who can say, I've been where you are, and I made it to the other side, not because I was rescued, but because someone gave me a reason to stay standing. Someone across the table nodded. Another began taking notes. And just like that, her voice didn't feel small anymore. Over the next several weeks, Sienna stepped into the kind of visibility she had once avoided. Interviews, speaking panels, committee planning sessions where she was no longer the quiet girl in the back, but a voice people paused to hear. She made mistakes, forgot things, fumbled sentences. But she also noticed something strange. People gave her grace. The same kind she had learned to give others. One afternoon, after a strategy session, Diane Yu pulled her aside. "You're doing more than we hoped for," she said. "You're grounding the entire project." Sienna smiled. "Most days I feel like I'm making it up as I go." Diane nodded. "That's what leaders do." The words landed like a stone in her chest, not heavy, but real. She walked out of that office and down the stairs into the sunlight, where two children were drawing chalk stars on the pavement outside the community center. One of them looked up at her. "Are you the lady who helped Liam?" Sienna paused, surprised. "How do you know about that?" "My sister said your picture's in the hallway. She said you're like, a good kind of famous." Sienna laughed. Not the awkward kind. The kind that bubbled up. Warm and earned. "Well," she said, crouching beside them, "I'm just someone who didn't walk away." That night, in her new apartment, she sat by the window with a cup of tea and opened the notebook where she now kept her goals. She crossed off a few. Find stable housing. Speak publicly once. Help one kid feel seen. And underneath, she wrote a new line in bold. Build something that outlives me. Because she wasn't just rebuilding her life anymore. She was building a legacy. It had been exactly 1 year since that cold afternoon. Sienna stood across the street from the same rusted bus stop where she had once clutched a single dollar in her fist and faced the decision that changed her life. The bench was still there, dented and stained. The trash can was still half broken. But something about it felt different now. Not because the street had changed. Because she had. In her hand was a takeout bag filled with warm sandwiches from the cafe near her new office. The one that had hired her not out of pity, but because she'd proven she had something to give. The other hand held 2 scarves, one knitted by a volunteer from the shelter she now helped coordinate. She wasn't there by accident. She had come to visit. To remember. As she stood quietly, a soft voice tugged at her sleeve. "Excuse me, miss? My mom told me to wait here, but she's been gone a long time." Sienna turned and saw a boy. Younger than Liam had been. His shoes were too big. His jacket too thin. In his hand was a comic book, dog-eared and gripped tight. Her heart skipped. The boy's eyes held the same blend of fear and stubborn hope. Sienna smiled gently. "What's your name?" "Micah," he said, eyes lowering. "I think I missed the bus." Sienna knelt to meet him at eye level. "Well, Micah, I've got an extra sandwich. Would you like to share it with me while we wait together?" He looked up slowly and nodded. They sat on the bench, side by side, as the street moved around them, loud, distracted, indifferent. But here, in this quiet pocket of the city, one small act of presence began again. She didn't ask for his story yet. He wasn't ready. But she offered warmth. Safety. The simple kind of attention that children recognize like sunlight on skin. She handed him one of the scarves. "You can keep it," she said. He blinked. "Why?" "Because someone gave me a reason to keep going once," she replied. "And I'd like to pass it on." Later, as she walked home, Sienna passed the alley where she used to cry after job interviews. The wall she once leaned on when she had nowhere else to go. And as she passed it, she stopped, just for a second, and touched the bricks with her fingers. "I made it," she whispered. Not to a destination, but to herself. She reached her apartment just as the sun broke through a thick layer of clouds. On her desk was Liam's drawing, still framed. Still sacred. Next to it was a new one, Micah's, a crayon rocket ship with her name written in shaky block letters underneath it. "You helped me fly." Sienna smiled and opened her notebook. writing 3 final words beneath her goals. It all began. Sometimes the world gives you exactly $1 and 1 moment. And sometimes you spend them both on someone else. And in doing so, you buy back your life. Not all at once, but piece by beautiful piece. This story reminds us that life doesn't always change through grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it changes in the quiet moment when we choose compassion over convenience. Sienna didn't have wealth, power, or stability when she saw a lost child at a bus stop. All she had was empathy and the courage to act on it. In giving her last dollar, she gave more than money. She gave time, protection, and presence. And in return, life gave her something priceless: purpose, healing, and a second chance. The lesson is simple but powerful. Even when you feel invisible, your smallest act of kindness can ripple outward and become someone else's lifeline. Sometimes, saving someone else is how you save yourself. Thank you for taking the time to experience this story with us. If it moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the quiet power of kindness, we invite you to subscribe to the channel for more emotionally rich, real-life inspired stories just like this one. Your support helps us keep sharing moments that matter. We'd also love to hear from you. What part of the story resonated most with you? Leave a comment below and let us know. Your voice helps shape the stories we tell next.